welcome to the 10th episode of the Minnesota Gardening Podcast. I know there are a lot of gardening podcasts who've been around for hundreds and hundreds of episodes, but this 10th episode just seems really, really great to me. I'm super excited about it. We have a wonderful guest for you today, and she's our first guest from outside of Minnesota. Her name is Megan Gilger, and she has the Fresh Exchange podcast, and she lives in Michigan and just does an amazing job. And I've gotten to know her through Instagram and through her podcast, and was lucky enough that she decided to join us for the Minnesota Gardening Podcast because I, as you've probably noticed through these 10 episodes, tend to get a little excitable and a little energetic about things, and I'm always looking to the future and always looking for what we can do next and that kind of thing, and don't always take enough time to reflect and to look back and be thankful for what we've got and what we've got going on. And Megan is just incredible at that reflection and utilizing gardening as, you know, a story for life and where things are going. So I'm just super, super happy to have Megan Gilger of the Fresh Exchange podcast on with us today. And you can find the show notes and links to Megan's podcast and the great courses and different memberships that she's got at minnesotagardening.com/10. All right, today I'm just really, really excited to have a wonderful guest. She's our first guest from outside of Minnesota to appear on the podcast. And we have Megan Gilger with us today from Fresh Exchange. She's got an amazing blog, podcast, helping people connect deeper with nature. And so it's a really, really wonderful thing. So Megan, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an honor to have you here because as folks who've listened to the podcast for a little while and know me in real life and that kind of thing, know that I'm kind of forward looking and just a little bit too much in the now and where we're going and that type of thing. And I don't take enough time to reflect and to look back and to consider where things have gone and the progress that we've made in life and in gardening and all those types of things. And your podcast, Fresh, I don't know why I can't say that right now. Fresh Exchange is airing right before Thanksgiving of 2021. And so I thought it would be great to have you talk with us about reflection and being thankful for what we've got going on with our gardens and what we've got going on in life, because you just do such a great job of connecting and that type of work. So first, before we get started, could you just introduce yourself a little bit and talk about the wonderful things you do?
Yeah, so I grew up gardening and with my grandfather, and then he passed away and it became something where I didn't really have that space in my life. And when I grew older and started thinking about settling down after I had my son, I realized that I really needed that space again. So we had purchased about 10 acres, which is now 15 acres in Leelanau County, Michigan, which is on this like peninsula that juts out into Lake Michigan. And we sit on top of a hill, and we have built about, I would say, almost an acre-sized garden that's in a regenerative polyculture model of gardening with the chickens and the full cycle of compost and all of that. So I didn't grow up doing things that way. I have completely taught myself how to utilize those models. And so I'm a big proponent of, just kind of observing nature itself, allowing it to kind of give us a place of reflection so that we can kind of learn more about who we are. And a lot of people would put me in the homesteader category, but I don't necessarily go for the self-sufficiency model. I'm more about the community sufficiency idea, where our gardens allow us to connect to one another and to just create more community. So we do a lot of things with that. Like our garden many times is enjoyed by many of our friends and not just ourselves. So we see the garden as a beautiful space of community and connection, both to more people in our community, but also to people in our lives and to each other, and then to nature itself. So it's how I have learned to find grounding and purpose. And particularly during the pandemic, it was a huge point of that for us, just like for so many other people.
That's exactly how I got back into gardening in a lot bigger level was during COVID. That was my solitude. That was my way of connecting and staying active and doing things and having something to keep my mind connected and that kind of thing. Why do you think, Megan, that gardening is such I guess grounding is the best word, but how do you suppose that gardening connects people so much together with nature? Why is that, and why are we drawn to gardening?
I think because it gives us an initial purpose, like to do it. So we can obtain something from it. We can obtain, like, harvest actual food. And so there's always that desire as humans to, have sufficiency in some way and to control that. So I think we automatically can feel like, okay, we're doing something for ourselves because we're growing something. The odd thing that happens if we're really aware and want to be aware is that our harvest isn't always just the food that we get to put on our plates. It is also like all these sorts of things that are detailed and shown to us through gardening. And we get to play with the different ideas that sometimes are hard to deal with when we're in real life. Like going through transitions, for instance, is modeled beautifully in the garden, and how it can be a both and of challenge and beauty at the same time. So we're talking a lot about that in our online community, is like, how do we let go? How do we transition through life? And we can play with these ideas in the safe space of a garden and watch nature unfold that truth to us, which is super cool.
Gardens help to connect us, but also help to connect to our past. And on your podcast, you told an extraordinary story about your connection with your grandfather to your past, and how gardening really brings full circle, and why does gardening really help to connect us both to where we are today with our communities, but also with the past and with the history of us?
I think we can utilize gardens, but I think we can also utilize just like places in nature in general. They create a backdrop that we can kind of tell time through. And I think that's how it connects us. And then there's the sense, like, to me, like with my grandfather, I always remember that smell of tomato plants. And whenever I smell it, I go back to when I was 6 years old in his garden, wandering those rows. And it made me realize, like, that scent is alone a way to transport ourselves through time and space in some way. It can create memories, and we do it in so many different ways, but the garden does it in this cyclical way. And so it allows us a moment to back reflect, into those moments where that scent was present. So when I think about this, I'm always thinking too about like how my kids will experience this. They are 5 and 2, so they're small, but they definitely are a part of the garden. And my son is now becoming aware of the different scents of the garden because we grow a ton of herbs. And I just think about maybe one day, like, he'll be somewhere, who knows, in the world. And whether I'm with him or not, or whatever life looks like at the moment for him, if he smells those things, he'll be transported back to that garden moment that felt safe and secure and grounded. And because it was in some way predictable. And I think that's the beauty of the garden, is that there is predictability that gives us grounding alone. So it creates a safe space.
Is there a way to create those experiences, or is that something that just has?
I think it just happens when we're building a garden. I mean, if we're building a garden in the same space relatively every year, there's certain cyclical routines that those things alone are grounding. Routine is grounding. So the garden itself, by what it is, you can only plant certain things at certain times of the year. So if you miss that window, you kind of miss that window. And I think there's some beauty in that just naturally unfolds as a space to hold memories because of that. And so, like, I can always remember, like, what life feels like in some way when we plant the tomatoes every year, or we plant the cabbage, Napa cabbage in like early April, and putting out the tunnels, like, or even upcoming right now, or I guess we'll have passed it, but garlic planting. Like, I always tell people, like, if your fingers aren't numb in your gloves by the time you're done doing it, then you've done it too early. But these cyclical things happen, and that is the beauty of the garden, is it gives us that natural routine that nature only can create.
How do you think people should go about handling reflection with gardening, and not just reflection for the past gardening season, but just reflection as to how their life is impacted by gardening and being outdoors and having their hands in the dirt and that kind of thing? What sort of, I don't know if strategies is the right word, but what sort of concepts do you have around reflection that we should be cognizant of?
That's a really good question, because I've tried to figure out how to do this. In our online community, I offer this download for people to help with garden journaling that creates a reflection and that connection. And it's something that needs still more work, because it isn't, I naturally work this way. And so it's one of those things, and I have since I was a child. So it's one of those things that I'm trying to figure out how to translate that and how to help people, because it is so amazing. But I think one of the ways, especially I do it, is I track so much through my photos on my phone. Mm-hmm. And by looking through them, I can I'll even group all the images of certain raised beds, and just seeing that growth, and then seeing even sometimes I'll capture it where I do a timer. And so I'm in it too. And just seeing the transition of myself, who I looked like, I can think back to oh, this was going on in July, this was going on in June. And then I can reflect on where I am now, and also see how the garden either connects with that or doesn't. I mean, because the truth, and what I kind of see is that every single month of the year, even if we're not growing in a garden, it all offers us unique things that we get to experience and practice a little bit throughout each month, whether we fully align with that or not. And that is something that is a good way to give a system to how we can reflect and look back and grow and all of those things. So I always see, you can just think about fall, think about yourself a year ago. What were you like? What was going on in your life? I mean, we can all talk about the pandemic or, how that was affecting our life at that point, but how did we adapt? How did we grow? What came out of that? Thinking about those things in that way is really helpful to see how far we've gone, and then how far, we've even come in our own gardens along the way. It's kind of exciting to watch.
I ran across a photo we used to, in the back corner of is basically our side yard over here. We used to have our compost pile there, and we had a compost bin made out of pallets. It was super rocking. And then we have one now in the back, but I ran across a picture the other day of that compost bin, and I really had to actively work to get my brain to the point of, yes, that's when we had gardens in the ground before we built the raised beds. And this is what point in time that was at. What do you suggest for people to do as they are recording and journaling and that type of thing, which I'm just terrible at?
Yeah.
Do you think people should, what's the most effective way of doing that? Should they write things down weekly, monthly? What have you found works best for folks?
I like writing weekly. Personally, I think it gives, if you can do it. And what I do is I have a notebook that sits on a table in our living room, and which is right off of where the garden is. And so I can see the gardens when I'm doing it, which is helpful. In the summer, I sit outside sometimes and do it in the evening with a glass of wine or something. But in that reflection or reflective point of that week, and you could do it, sometimes it's best to even do it on a Monday, especially if you've done a lot of work over the weekend or something like that. For some people, a Monday evening is really good. Just whenever there's a down night, instead of turning on the TV, you pick up your journal, which is kind of, hard to get into a routine of, but usually after a month, you usually can get it. But I think the best time to do it is definitely when you maybe start your seeds indoors, or if you don't do that, when you start clearing the ground or the snow starting to melt enough that you can kind of get out and do it. To start then, which sounds silly because you're not really putting anything in the ground, but it gives things are less intense in terms of the amount of work. Like June becomes really hard. So starting that practice then could be very difficult. Whereas if you start it in March or April, it may be a lot easier to add it into your routine. And I think it's really nice. And just to even start, even you don't have to go super deep. Like you could just like be like, okay, weather was kind of like this. And, I did this in the garden. And I think over time, you can start asking yourself a little harder questions like, what was life like this week? What did we do? And in some way over time, because my grandfather did this, there was like this story that was written week to week through what he saw just by reflecting on his own life or what was going on in the garden. It was a really beautiful thing. And then, thinking about passing that down to your children, it's a powerful testament of what life was really like.
And leading from reflection to the concept of thankfulness and daily thankfulness and that type of thing, where, like I said earlier, we're right around Thanksgiving of 2021 here. And we have this year, hopefully more people have more to be thankful for this year than they did last year. And hopefully they found things to be thankful for in the crazy year that was last year. And people are in process of getting their lives hopefully back to normal. But it has been difficult, obviously. So how can we use gardening as an allegory to thankfulness and where we're at in our lives?
So I'm going through this routine this year in the garden where as I'm removing plants and kind of calling it done on those things, I'm reflecting mentally on like thinking about those plants and what they did through that year. And it's just like this slow practice of like being grateful for this plant and then also excited for what is opening because it's going somewhere else, So it's like this kind of routine of just like slowly like thinking in my head, well, you don't have to say it out loud because people might think you're crazy that are around you, but just kind of mentally being like, I'm really thankful that I'd never grown Rudbeckia, and it was one of the most amazing plants in our garden this year. It was beautiful. And I'm really sad to see it go. But next year, I know now, like I can grow it. One, two, I can actually like maybe do something different with it now that I understand the plant better. And so just like seeing that point of like gratitude, and this can be reflected in our own life. Like, for instance, you can be going through something like, let's just say you're moving. A lot of people moved during the pandemic, or you're buying a house. It's a transition period, even if you're excited about it, but you can have gratefulness and thankfulness for the opportunity to move into something new. You can then be sad that you actually are leaving another space. No matter what it is, it's still some level of mourning that you'll go through, and then excited and looking forward to the opportunity that it creates. Even if it feels scary, there's still an opportunity that arises. So I think that's kind of the beauty of the garden, is that it gives, like I said, it gives us our place to kind of practice some of these things that can feel really hard in our personal life, but we can make them small, tiny routines in some way within that gardening experience.
And we always have another shot at it. There's always going to be next year.
Yeah,
and there's always going to be
totally
the ability to do things even better and differently. And I think that's one of the things that I find extremely freeing about gardening is like same thing as to when during the pandemic we cut all my hair off and we went bald with the hair, is that if it looks terrible, the hair will grow back.
Yeah.
And and we decided to keep the bulb, by the way, just for everybody listening to the podcast. But with gardening, you have another shot. You have another spring, you have another fall, you have other times where you can do things.
Yeah.
And that I think is a beautiful thing for people to be able to experiment and to push themselves.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I always like suggest too that people, if they're feeling overwhelmed by the garden, because a lot of people can feel overwhelmed, is to start one small and two, because you can always go bigger. It's harder to like go back down and you can feel like a big failure. or just grow a ton of herbs, because you definitely will be most likely successful with herbs and maybe some marigolds. You will feel successful.
Exactly. Yeah, those are really great strategies for getting started. And let's talk a little bit about your story about how you got started with gardening at your farm. And I would also like to recognize, just really quick before we get too far, is I was really impressed with what you did on how you talked about the indigenous nature and the how everywhere we're on here in Shakopee, we're on Dakota Sioux land and that type of thing. And so can you talk people through how and why you wanted to research that and why it's important?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I grew up in Harbor Springs, Michigan, which has an area that they indicated as Indian Town. There's a long history of very sad Native American stories there when settlers came. And so as a young child, I was made aware of the history of, European white Americans and Canadian French Americans coming into this region of the United States, and how my own history involves some very sad things that happened to the indigenous people. And so that were in that area. I also have a very deep, that no one talks about because it was not something that people tracked, but my grandfather was half Odawa. So I also have some of that in me. And so I felt that it was something that I needed to explore. And when I knew that we were making this choice to purchase land, I felt really weird about it because I didn't like that idea of land ownership and the boundary idea. And so I was like, how can I look at this in a new way? And that's when I saw some people talking about some of this, understanding what land you reside on and things like that. And so it was not too long after we purchased the land that I really dug in and learned that Leelanau County, where we are, pretty much was a shared hunting ground between the Chippewa and the Odawa Indians, which is incredible to think about because they made a treaty that said we will share this fertile ground because it is so fertile that it will produce, enough food for both of us. And we're going to agree that we will have peaceful interactions on this hunting grounds. So, and they called it the Land of Delight. And so I thought about that and I was like, wow, this is crazy. This is an opportunity to heal something that I didn't even realize I would have the opportunity to, right? Because when we landed up here and we started building our home and everything, we chose a spot where we weren't going to cut down any trees. We weren't going to do anything harmful. And in fact, the spot that we chose with our builder was all invasive plants, everything. And it was just rocky and gross. There was nothing fertile about it. And then once we got settled and we started putting in seed and things like that and trying to grow wild rye and things like that to just put something into the soil because it was so rocky. I mean, it was like living in a gravel pit when we started. And now if you look at photos, you would never know what it looked like. And within the 4 years that we've lived here, we never had squirrels when we first lived here. Now we have squirrels. We have plenty of rabbits. We have coyotes that come through our yard. We didn't have that much wildlife. And now we have so much in the amount of butterflies and bugs and caterpillars. I mean, I've seen it in the birds. The birds are insane in our yard now. And I think it's just this desire to focus on thinking about how can I ask what the Native American people would want for this sort of land. And it's been huge, for me to think about our land differently in that way and realize that it's not about ownership, but about responsibility. And so, and our neighbors work in the same way. They all have 10 to 14 acres and kind of believe the same things. We keep things as natural as possible and think about how does this contribute to the greater ecosystem that preserves this concept of fertility and peace and longevity of what matters most, which is the natural world.
Yeah, exactly. And if you are ever in Shakopee, if you ever find yourself toward Minneapolis, we have just an amazing museum here that the Shakopee Midwakanton Sioux community has put together that talks about history and talks about and it's really amazing. And so if anybody in Minnesota who's listening, who doesn't have to travel from out of state should absolutely, and people who travel from out of state should absolutely check that out because it's just incredible. So perfect. Well, we are, Megan, running up against the end of our time here today. And we've got a couple other questions, other kind of quick fire questions that we've never had somebody outside of Minnesota on the podcast before. So we'll see how these work. We'll adapt them a little bit for you in Michigan. And so the first thing is, have you ever visited Minnesota?
I flew through there. I'll be honest, I have not.
Okay. That doesn't count. Yeah.
I know.
So we'll put Michigan in place of the Minnesota questions for you here. So what is your favorite food grown in Michigan?
Oh, that's a hard one. Definitely apples. We're really good at apples here. Really good. And our ciders are really good. So I would say apples for sure. But that's hard.
And there's a lot of choices, I imagine, especially blueberries. I love, we stay on the UP. A few years ago, we were near Grand Marais and we just had a camp spot with no utilities, no nothing. And it was just right on the lake. And there was this huge blueberry patch that was just amazing. It was awesome. So what is essential reading for you?
Essential reading is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. It is not a Michigan book. It is not any of that. In fact, she's from the Finger Lake region of New York area, but it helped me understand the conversation of plants and humans and why it's so important.
I'll put a link in the show notes for it. So that's really good. What is your favorite place to visit in Michigan?
Where we live is amazing. Don't get me wrong. It is definitely, it's on every Pure Michigan ad around. So, but the UP is unbelievable. Like you just said, Whitefish Point is possibly some of the best rock hunting I think I did in the UP. But I also really love Harbor Springs, Michigan, which is where I'm originally from. It's kind of tucked away and really quiet and special all in its own way because all the water is like spring fed and it's so clear and beautiful. So,
and if you were a plant, what plant would you be?
Oh, I love that question. I think I would be a maple tree. I love I've just always connected to them. Or a white pine, either one. They're both really beautiful. Maybe, you know what? I'm going with white pine because they love winter a lot and they thrive in the winter. So yeah. And we have this beautiful white pine we call the mother tree on our land. And she is something to be in awe of. So yeah.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Yeah. Well, Megan, thank you so much for being with us here today. Will you tell everyone, actually talk about what you do as an entrepreneur a little bit with your community and just the different things that you do just to make sure everybody knows how they can connect with you and where they can find you?
Yeah. So I have my blog, which is freshexchange.com. You can find most everything there, but just on the homepage we just launched a new website design. And then we also have our online community, which opens every season at the beginning of the season. And this space is for people who are looking to dive into gardening and have support of the community. We span multiple zones all over the United States and Europe. We have lots of events on there and things like that. It's just an amazing group of humans coming together to learn and focus on doing things well in their garden and then reflecting on it all at the same time. And then I also have my podcast, which we air 2 episodes weekly. One that's kind of focused more on the gardening aspect and the other one that's focused more on that meditative sort of idea of the garden.
Perfect. Beautiful. Well, Megan Gilger, thank you so, so much for being with us today. I really appreciate just your knowledge and wisdom and just the really great things that you had to talk about as we head into Thanksgiving and all the things we can be thankful for with our gardens.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
See what I mean? Megan was just awesome to talk to. It was such a wonderful episode with her beautiful, NPR soothing voice, and it was perfect for a Thanksgiving episode. And so I just really appreciate her time in joining us to talk through thankfulness and reflection in our gardens. And we would love to hear from you. So if you want to take a moment on this Thanksgiving and go onto Instagram, share a photo and stories, and tag both Fresh Exchange and Minnesota Gardening on there, we would love to see what you are thankful for this Thanksgiving. I am thankful for my family. My number one gardening thing that I'm thankful for is those gorgeous Brussels sprouts that we grew this year that Isla, my 10-year-old, helped to harvest and just did an amazing job with that. And so with that, I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving, and tune in next week when we're going to be talking about overwintering bees. And you've heard a lot this fall about leaving your leaves in the ground, and now we're going to understand a lot more about why that is and what you as a landowner should be thinking about when it comes to overwintering insects and pollinators and all those friendly folks that we want to make sure are happy and healthy in our landscape. And with that, have a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving, and I'll see you again soon.